Good afternoon. This is Angela with Parker's Hausfrau. I am up at my dad's house this afternoon and I have a few minutes of downtime. So I brought my notes with me and I figured I would take this opportunity to just sit and chit chat with y'all. I put on a warm sweater that was my mom's. It's a super warm wool. It's kind of chilly in the house here. I thought I'd just hang out for a few minutes and talk about a subject that's been kind of weighing on me. And I don't have any solutions really, but I thought maybe it's something that resonates with y'all and you might have thoughts and feedback on. So today I want to talk about being a homemaker in an individualistic culture. My hope is that we can find solutions both as individuals and as a greater society to help support a community of homemakers and the value that they bring to our overall culture and community. If you are interested more in kind of the socioeconomic aspects and cultural political aspects of homemaking in the modern era, you should check out my video on Shannon Hayes' book, Radical Homemakers. First, I want to say we live in a society of toxic individuality. This has really come to the forefront in the last few years as we're going through a really difficult time as Americans, but also globally going through a difficult period in history. We've seen that especially American society, again, I can't speak for elsewhere at all, but American society has become highly individualistic. We've sort of always been that way a little bit, but it's becoming pushed more and more and more to an extreme. For me, my own personal experience is that it becomes more difficult to find community, particularly community that is diverse and challenges us and expresses a broad range of beliefs and opinions, but still has a shared common ground so that we can build community together. I feel like American society is becoming much more fractured and segmented, and I know I'm not the only one who shares that belief, and that can make it really, really difficult for the few of us that engage in a profession of homemaking. Unlike folks who work outside the home and can forge and build friendships and relationships with their coworkers, homemakers don't have that advantage. We work alone in the confines of our home and to some extent in the greater community. We are in our neighborhoods during the workday when others are commuting to and from work and engaging in social relationships in the workplace. We are in neighborhoods that are empty. And I know Shannon Hayes speaks about this in her book. In past generations, our neighborhoods were thriving places even in the middle of the workday because we had a greater percentage of homemakers as a profession, but we also had a greater percentage of children that were at home during the day, and we had a greater percentage young children. And we had a greater percentage of the elderly who were still in their communities and not partitioned off into assisted living and things like that. So now, those of us that are homemakers face this situation where we are either at home alone during the day, or we are at home with small children and therefore isolated from other adults during the day. And I know that we seek out mommy groups or homemaker groups or what have you and try and form those connections. That has become more difficult, obviously, in the current situation that we're in, where social gatherings are really, really limited. And again, those social gatherings, even within our groups of be they homeschoolers or moms with young children or homemakers or householders, that those groups can be even further fractured along political lines. And so folks that we used to be able to hang out with, we now no longer feel safe hanging out with. So this can be a real problem for those of us that are homemakers, that are social beings. Humans are social beings. And I think that with the current world situation that we're dealing with, we are becoming ever more and more and more isolated as homemakers, and thankfully are able to reach out in online spaces to form relationships. I have 2 YouTube channels. I am active on Instagram. I obviously don't think that social media is inherently bad. I think there are pluses and minuses, but one of the pluses is that in a pandemic life, we're still able to connect with other folks who are interested in traditional domestic skills and lead a life like we lead, because there's a lot to be gained from having relationships with folks that have similar life circumstances. You can help support each other. But when we live in a culture where folks are increasingly working longer and longer hours outside of the home, Americans work a ridiculously long work week compared to other societies, particularly a lot of European societies. We're spending less and less time in the home, in our neighborhoods, forging bonds in our local communities. And that means those of us that are homemakers can feel increasingly isolated, and it can be really challenging for us. In generations past, homemaking was really a community vocation. It was something with a network of folks in your shared profession, where you could pool your resources and pool your labor and join together for canning days, quilting bees. If you had a baby, other homemakers in your neighborhood would help bring you food and possibly help you clean your house or look after your other children while you were recovering from childbirth. So I have quite a bit of insomnia, and when I'm up late at night working on sewing or knitting projects or editing video, I often have YouTube channels running in the background, and I stumbled upon a series of documentaries about Hutterites, and I have always been really fascinated with communal living and intentional communities. And if you aren't familiar with the Hutterites, they're an Anabaptist group that's originally from Germany, and then I think Ukraine. They got kicked out of a series of countries and came to America and Canada in the 19th century. And they live a truly communal lifestyle where nobody is paid a wage. The community owns all resources shared together. There's obviously strict religious and gender roles, and so I'm not saying that I in any way am interested in emulating this community, but there are some good takeaways. Folks don't have to worry about their rent. They don't have to worry about their grocery bill. If you want to make clothes for your family, you go to the community's, the colony, as they call them, sewing room, and the fabric and buttons and what have you are all free. And also there are sewing machines there for you to use that belong to everybody in the community. So this really got me thinking, watching this series of documentaries on YouTube. And also I found a channel of a young woman in her 20s who is a Hutterite, and I'll link to her channel below because I find it really fascinating. Again, it's the kind of thing that she's vlogging about, and while I'm sewing, it's something I can kind of have going in the background. So I think it's really interesting to watch these videos of this young 20-something woman and what it's like to live in a communal society. And I think for me, I find that especially interesting looking at what it's like to be a homemaker in a very individualistic and isolated culture versus here in America. There are communities of folks where homemakers cook with other women, they sew with other women, they share the really onerous cleaning chores so that everybody only has to engage in a terrible, miserable cleaning job for a short period of time because you're sharing the job with a group of other folks. When you have a baby, someone cleans your house for you and helps care for your children, and you are relieved of all other obligations in the community for 8 weeks while you're recovering. And I've been thinking about that and like what it must be like to be a homemaker and not have the burden of preparing every meal yourself, not have the burden of doing all of the cleaning yourself, not have the burden of working in isolation alone, but instead working with a group of friends where you are singing and conversing and enjoying each other's company, and many hands are making light work. Again, I wouldn't want to live in a Hutterite commune, but I find the notion of communal living intriguing, especially for homemakers. To watch a little bit and see a little bit, a window into the lives of folks that live a very different lifestyle than me, but also have a lot of shared domestic skills and domestic obligations as me, has been really interesting. To think about what it would be like to be a homemaker with a cohort of other homemakers supporting me versus trying to do it on my own, where all of my neighbors work outside of the home. I don't have any homemakers on my street. I don't have anybody else living the same kind of life that I'm living in my neighborhood that I can connect with on a regular basis, much less a whole group of folks all leaning on each other and sharing each other's burdens. One of the things I thought was really interesting about the Hutterite lifestyle is really just thinking about the partitioning of difficult chores and breaking them down into small segments where everybody gets a manageable chunk, and also you share the burdens together. So while nobody is working for a wage, everybody has got a free roof over their head in exchange for their labor, and everybody has all of the food they need. You don't have to worry about having a retirement fund. The community takes care of you in your old age. And that's just such a really different way from how American individualistic capitalist society thinks and functions. And it really makes me think about what changes I would want to see in our communities in order not only to support us as homemakers and make the job of being a homemaker not so isolating, but also the profession as a whole not to be so isolated from the rest of our culture, but also what the implications would be for the greater culture if we were not so individualistic. And I think it's really hard as a homemaker in an individualistic society because the job of homemaking is so tied to caregiving and is so tied to connecting to other people. So I will say, as somebody who's 42 years old now, the kind of social isolation I felt in my early 20s and mid 20s when I had one or two small children and was pregnant with my third feels a little bit different than how it feels to me now at this point in my homemaking career. Back then, I was very, very lonely. Most of my peer group were not having children when I was having children. I had one car to share with my spouse who was in grad school at the time. So I was really very, very isolated. We were also absolutely broke. So a lot of the social engagements that cost money, I just wasn't able to participate in. And I felt incredibly lonely. All day alone with a baby and a 2-year-old was really, really rough. But now that I'm 42, I know that I cherish my alone time much more because I'm in a household with 7 people, my dad, 4 children ages 10 to 18, and my husband and myself. And so I'm constantly engaging with really stimulating social interaction. Teenagers are amazing conversation partners, but it does make me think about what will happen when my kids are up and grown and what the future will look like for me as a homemaker. Will I again see the pendulum swing the other way and feeling very alone and isolated in my work, feeling that I have no other enriching intellectual conversation, no shared experience with other homemakers, and I'm home alone much of the day doing my work by myself? I know that I don't want that to be what I'm living in the future, and so it makes me think about what changes I would want to make in my own life and what changes I would want to see in the greater society. So I don't really have a lot of solutions. It's just sort of some thoughts that have been on my mind this past week as I've been up very late working on Christmas gifts, thinking about where will I find companionship and shared life experience in the future? What must that be like for other homemakers who are walking the same journey I'm walking, but I can't really connect with them because they're not in my neighborhood? I would love to hear your thoughts on community building as a homemaker in particular, on what it means to you to be a homemaker in an individualistic society, and what would be some of the benefits of changing the way we do things for us as individuals, but also for our whole community, to improve the well-being of all of us and improve our quality of life. I don't want to live in a commune with really strict gender and religious roles and a lot of homogeneity. I want to have diversity and be able to express myself and have my own unique style and my own hobbies. But there are some good takeaways to think about. What would it be like if we were a more community-minded society, and what would that mean for us as homemakers? So please share your thoughts, and if you have ways that you have found to be successful to connect with other homemakers and to bolster yourself with a community, please share those in the comments because maybe somebody else needs to hear about those resources. As always, this channel is not yet monetized, so if you are interested in supporting the work here, you can check out my Patreon down in the description. And I will be back next Friday, if not earlier. I may have a bonus video or two coming out in the interim between now and next Friday. Thanks.